"You are not invited to my birthday," Mom said, her voice cold, final, and utterly devastating. I froze, staring at my phone, my hands trembling. My chest tightened as if someone had slammed a door on my heart. I could hear the distant chatter of my family in the living room behind me, laughing, planning, celebrating, and I wasn't part of it. My throat burned with words I couldn't speak. The call started almost immediately, buzzing non-stop. "Friends, relatives, even neighbors, are you okay? What happened? Why wasn't your mom including you?" All flooding my phone. I shut it off, slumping into the velvet armchair, staring at the floor. Rage, disbelief, humiliation, and hurt collided inside me. Before I continue, I would like to know where you are watching from. Let me know in the comments section, and thanks for subscribing to Revenge Stories In. My name is Vivian Clark, I'm 38, and I've spent years quietly building my career and my life. I never flaunted my success, never demanded attention. I was steady, capable, reliable. And yet, this exclusion, felt like a public slap. My mother, obsessed with appearances and showing favoritism to my younger siblings, had drawn a line in the sand. I realized then, staring at my silenced phone, that I wasn't going to accept this quietly. I clenched my fists, breathing through the surge of anger. If she thought this would humiliate me, she was wrong. I would show her, everyone, exactly what it meant to underestimate me. And that's when the thought hit: my estate. My $15 million estate. And I would throw a celebration unlike anything anyone had ever seen, but she wouldn't be invited. I spent that night pacing my apartment, the city lights casting harsh reflections across my hardwood floors. I replayed Mom's words over and over: "You are not invited." Every syllable burned. How could someone who claimed to love me deliberately exclude me? My sisters, younger, carefree, laughing with her in the living room while I sat alone, it was unbearable. I thought about calling her, demanding an explanation, but the truth was already clear: she didn't care. Instead, I made a plan. My estate, the sprawling home I had poured years of sweat, late nights, and careful investments into, would become my answer. I would throw an event that celebrated me, my achievements, and my life. The guest list would include everyone important to me. Except my family. They had dismissed me for too long. I felt a surge of exhilaration, imagining their shock, the buzzing phone calls, the whispered conversations they couldn't control. This wasn't petty revenge, it was taking back my power. The following morning, I walked into work with my usual calm mask, but inside, fire roared. My assistant noticed immediately. "Vivian, you look different," she said, tilting her head. I smiled tightly, not wanting to reveal too much. Every interaction with colleagues felt sharper now, more charged. Everyone had always known I was competent, but no one knew how strategic I could be when pushed. I quietly made calls, hired planners, caterers, and decorators for the estate event, ensuring everything would be flawless. As I hung up the phone, I felt a small thrill. They had tried to belittle me, but I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing a triumph. My mother might have been the first to hurt me, but this time, I would control the narrative. Every detail mattered, every decision precise. I smiled, thinking of the moment my mother realized she wasn't invited. It would sting. It would sting a lot. By midweek, the plans had taken shape. The estate sparkled in my mind: golden chandeliers, a glass wine room, sprawling lawns with carefully lit paths. Guests would arrive, laughter would fill the air, and I would be at the center. Confident, radiant, untouchable. I could almost hear the calls from my mother, frantic and insistent, wondering why she hadn't received an invitation. But even as I imagined the grandeur, a pang of doubt crept in. Was I being too harsh? I shook my head firmly. No. She had made her choice. And now, it was my turn. Every email I sent, every RSVP I confirmed, felt like a small act of reclamation. I realized the truth. The exclusion had ignited a fire I didn't know I had, a determination to rise above, to transform pain into power. Friday evening came, and the estate was ready. Lights twinkled like stars, fountains whispered, and the scent of fresh flowers hung in the air. Guests began arriving, their eyes widening in admiration. "Vivian, this is incredible," one friend exclaimed, her voice brimming with awe. I smiled, accepting congratulations, knowing the best part was yet to come. And then, almost on cue, the phone started buzzing. Calls from my mother, sisters, even distant relatives who had always leaned on her influence. They were relentless. I silenced the device and took a deep breath. They thought they had power over me. They had underestimated the woman I had become. Tonight, they wouldn't see it, but very soon, they would realize, exclusion had never looked so spectacular. The night of the estate opening arrived, and guests flowed through the grand entrance, champagne glasses catching the lights like fireflies. Every corner was a testament to years of work and perseverance, artfully designed, immaculately curated. I moved through the crowd, accepting compliments with a smile, but inside, anticipation buzzed. This was more than a celebration. It was a statement. Some guests whispered, "Did you see the house? 15 million and every detail perfect." I nodded, letting them bask in admiration while my mind raced with the image of my mother's reaction. She had tried to diminish me all these years, to make me feel invisible. Tonight, I was the center of attention, and she was nowhere to be seen. The phone began to vibrate incessantly, flashing with calls and texts from her, demanding answers. I let it ring, taking my time. My sisters started calling too, their voices thick with confusion and frustration. Every ring was a reminder. I had been ignored, dismissed, and now, I held the power. Smiling, I lifted my glass to toast, silently celebrating the victory that hadn't even fully begun. As the evening deepened, laughter and music floated across the estate. Guests admired the gardens, the wine collection, even the rare artworks I had collected over decades. I watched them with satisfaction, but I couldn't help but glance at my phone again. Calls still poured in, and now emails arrived, too. Her voice demanding explanations in bold, urgent subject lines. I let them wait. Patience was part of my strategy. This wasn't just about an event, it was about control. My mother had once dictated my life with guilt and criticism. Tonight, I dictated the rules. I let the anticipation build, imagining her standing outside my estate, wondering if she was invited, realizing she wasn't. By the end of the night, a friend whispered, "Vivian, this is unbelievable, everyone is talking about it." I smiled, inwardly savoring the tension I had created. The night wasn't just an opening, it was a curtain rising on a new era, one where I decided who mattered and who didn't. And my family, for the first time, realized they were missing the show. The next morning, I awoke to dozens of missed calls and texts. I stared at the screen, each notification a reminder of their desperation. My mother's messages were increasingly frantic. "Vivian, this is unacceptable. How could you do this?" My sister's texts were filled with disbelief and confusion. For the first time, I realized how powerless they had made me feel, and now the tables had turned. I brewed coffee, letting the quiet morning settle in. The estate was still buzzing from the previous night, but now I felt a different kind of triumph, calm, controlled, undeniable. I knew they were scrambling, trying to regain influence, trying to understand why they hadn't been included. It was intoxicating to watch, but I reminded myself this was only the beginning. The opening had been the first act, the next moves required precision. I plotted my next steps carefully, thinking of ways to cement my independence and reinforce their realization. They could no longer control me. This was no longer personal revenge, it was liberation. Work offered a welcome distraction. As I walked into my office, colleagues noticed the change in my demeanor. I was more confident, sharper, and quietly triumphant. Some congratulated me on the estate event, others whispered about the spectacle they'd heard from guests. I let them talk, savoring their astonishment without a word of my own. Meanwhile, the barrage of family communication continued. I ignored it, letting the silence speak louder than any explanation. I could almost feel my mother fuming, pacing in frustration, realizing that her control over me had evaporated overnight. Every ignored call, every unanswered text, amplified the power I felt. By evening, a friend visiting from out of town said, "Vivian, I've never seen someone handle betrayal like this. Calm, brilliant, unstoppable." I smiled, knowing that patience and strategy were more effective than anger. The slow burn of my plan was working. Their panic would grow while I remained untouchable, and the story was far from over. That weekend, I decided to host a private brunch for friends and colleagues. Again, everyone important except my family. Invitations had been carefully worded, emphasizing gratitude and celebration, with no trace of malice. Yet, I knew the message would reach them indirectly. Word of my estate opening had spread, and the exclusion would not go unnoticed. The event went flawlessly. Laughter, conversation, and warmth filled the air. I mingled, letting guests admire the estate and my careful planning. And then, just as the brunch was reaching its peak, a subtle notification on my phone made me smirk, an unexpected visitor at the gate. Not my mother, not my sisters, but someone connected to them, a mutual acquaintance, bringing news, curiosity, and concern. The stage was set for the next twist. What they thought was the final act was merely the beginning. And for the first time, I felt the delicious certainty that the game had completely changed. They would now realize that the power they once wielded was no longer theirs, and I was only getting started. By Monday, the calls had multiplied, some polite, some sharp, some nearly panicked. My mother's voice on voicemail shook with frustration. "Vivian, you have to explain this, we need to talk." I didn't answer. Not yet. Every ignored call added weight to my quiet triumph. At work, I noticed colleagues whispering, eyes flicking toward me. My reputation had shifted almost overnight. No longer the overlooked daughter or the one dismissed at family gatherings, I was now the woman who had orchestrated a dazzling display, without lowering herself to anger or confrontation. That realization filled me with a calm satisfaction I hadn't felt before. The twist came mid-afternoon. My mother's closest friend called my assistant, asking to speak with me. I agreed, but only on my terms, in my office, with witnesses nearby. When she arrived, I maintained a polite smile, though inside, I savored the subtle panic flickering across her face. She was used to dictating outcomes. Tonight, she would feel the power I had finally seized. The conversation was carefully measured. My mother's friend tried to guilt me, insisting I had gone too far, that family was supposed to matter. I listened, letting every word hang in the air, absorbing the anger but showing none of my own. "I appreciate your concern," I said finally. "But I think it's time my choices were respected. I won't let anyone dictate my happiness, or my celebrations, anymore." My calm authority left her speechless. I could almost see her mind racing, imagining how my mother would react when she found out. Leaving her at my office door, I smiled politely, though inwardly I was thrilled. The message had landed. My mother's influence was already eroding, replaced by admiration, curiosity, and a subtle fear from those used to controlling me. Later that week, I received an unexpected invitation. My mother had planned a private brunch, to reconcile, she said. But I knew the timing was too convenient. I smelled strategy behind her words. I accepted, but with conditions. Only my rules, only my guests, and only in a space I controlled. It was time to escalate, to show not just exclusion, but empowerment. I wanted her to feel the weight of her own misjudgment. When I arrived, she looked stunned. Her carefully rehearsed lines faltered under my confident presence. I smiled warmly, politely ignoring the tension she radiated. This was no longer a brunch. It was a chessboard, and I was several moves ahead. The brunch began politely, but tension simmered beneath the surface. Every anecdote I shared, every laugh I elicited from my guests, reminded my mother of the spectacle she had missed. She tried to interrupt, tried to assert authority, but I controlled the flow with subtle precision. By mid-morning, whispers of admiration and praise had made their way to her ears. The realization hit, this wasn't just about a brunch, a birthday, or a house. It was about respect, recognition, and power. Things she had taken for granted for decades. I maintained my smile, soft and unyielding. The sweet satisfaction of watching someone who had once dictated my worth struggle to regain control was intoxicating. And I knew this was only the beginning of the lessons she would learn. Just as I thought the morning had reached its peak, a surprising twist arrived. One of my mother's business associates, unaware of our personal tensions, mentioned a significant professional opportunity that could benefit both of us. I listened, pretending disinterest, then subtly leveraged it to my advantage. I guided the conversation, planting seeds that only I could harvest. My mother's frustration grew visibly. She realized too late that even her attempts at reconciliation could now be used to reinforce my position. The brunch ended with applause for my careful hosting, and my mother departed, flustered and unnerved. I smiled quietly, savoring the satisfaction of control, strategy, and subtle revenge. The game was far from over, but tonight, victory felt deliciously close. By midweek, the phone calls had become relentless. My mother's number flashed constantly, each ring a reminder of the power shift I had orchestrated. I ignored most, letting the tension build. I could almost hear the disbelief through the line. How could she do this without us? At work, whispers of the estate event had spread beyond my department. Colleagues admired my composure and the elegance of the gathering. Every compliment reinforced my inner strength. I had created a spectacle that demanded respect, yet I hadn't stooped to petty revenge or humiliation. It was satisfaction in style, and that elegance made the frustration of my family sting even more. That evening, I received a text from my mother, "Vivian, we need to talk before this goes too far." I didn't reply. Instead, I began drafting an invitation for a new initiative, an exclusive showcase at my estate, making sure she was conspicuously absent. Thursday arrived, and I hosted a small pre-event gathering for close friends and mentors. My mother called mid-afternoon, voice tight with anger. "Vivian, this is ridiculous. How can you exclude your family like this?" I let her words hang, savoring the sense of control I now had. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I replied calmly. Every syllable underscored my confidence. She couldn't argue, couldn't manipulate me. For the first time in years, she realized that I wasn't the daughter who would bend to her whims. Later, I noticed a subtle shift. Her friends and colleagues were beginning to question her authority and judgment. My strategy was working. I didn't have to say anything. The cracks in her control were now visible to all. The next day brought a shocking twist. My mother had attempted to co-opt one of my trusted business contacts, trying to undermine my upcoming estate event. I discovered it through a timely email from the associate, who expressed confusion over conflicting information. I turned the moment into an advantage. I thanked the associate for their clarity, subtly reinforcing my leadership and reliability. Word spread quickly, and suddenly, my mother's credibility was questioned in the very circles she had long dominated. That evening, I sat in my home office, smiling quietly. Everyone thought the story was winding down, but the tension had only just begun to peak. My victory was being built step by step, methodically, and she had no idea what was coming next. Friday morning, I received an unexpected message from my younger sibling, "Vivian, why didn't you invite Mom? People are talking." I smiled, realizing my plan had already created ripple effects across the family. At the same time, my estate team finalized preparations for the showcase, adding subtle flourishes I knew would astonish attendees. The meticulous attention to detail was my quiet power. I didn't need drama, the spectacle itself would speak volumes. By evening, as guests began arriving, my mother's friends and associates trickled in as well, curious, anxious, and secretly impressed. She arrived later, hesitant, unsure whether to intervene or observe. I had anticipated her indecision. Tonight, the game board was fully set. The showcase unfolded flawlessly. Every element, from lighting to catering, reflected taste, precision, and authority. Attendees whispered admiration, and I could feel my mother's gaze flickering across the room, unsure whether to claim credit, criticize, or retreat. Halfway through, I introduced a subtle announcement. A philanthropic initiative tied to the estate, with my leadership and vision at the forefront. Gasps filled the room. I saw her flinch. This wasn't just a party, it was a statement. By the night's end, whispers of envy, admiration, and surprise had spread. My mother had been outmaneuvered at every turn, and the ripple effects of her exclusion were clear. The tension was tangible, yet I maintained my composure, calm and smiling, knowing the final act of this story, her complete reckoning, was still to come. Saturday morning, I received a flood of texts and missed calls from my family. My phone vibrated endlessly, yet I didn't answer. They had no idea I had anticipated this chaos. I had arranged a private tour of the estate for my mother and siblings, framed as a family catch-up. She arrived expecting tension, resentment, maybe an argument. Instead, I greeted her warmly, smiling. I led her through the rooms, showing off the event planning, the philanthropic wing, and the team that had executed everything flawlessly. Her expression shifted from pride to discomfort. I didn't need to say a word. The subtle, undeniable display of my competence and vision spoke louder than any criticism she could muster. By the end of the tour, her posture had changed. She realized that her attempt to control me had failed spectacularly, and she was powerless to reverse it. I hadn't humiliated her publicly, but the social and emotional reckoning was complete. Later that evening, a gathering of friends and mentors reconvened. Whispers about my mother's prior exclusions and attempts at manipulation spread quickly. I stayed calm, engaging my guests with charm and warmth. Unexpectedly, my mother tried to intervene, attempting to redirect praise toward herself. I smiled politely, letting her words falter in the room. Guests glanced at her, confused by her awkwardness. One by one, they acknowledged my efforts openly. For the first time in years, she had no allies. My methodical patience, strategy, and composure had turned every potential misstep into her humiliation. The realization dawned: the more she tried to assert authority, the more isolated she became. The following day, a private family discussion was scheduled. I invited my mother and siblings, with my terms clear: respect, acknowledgement, or leave. She arrived, tense and defensive, expecting confrontation. I calmly laid out the story, the exclusion, the planning, the estate event, and the ripple effects of her actions. Each point landed like a weight she could not lift. She tried to interject, but I controlled the narrative, speaking with clarity and dignity. By the end, she was speechless. My siblings looked at me with a mix of admiration and guilt. I had not only reclaimed my power but had reshaped the family dynamics permanently. 2 days later, I received a call from my mother, quieter this time. She admitted, for the first time, that she had underestimated me. "Vivian, I see now, you were always capable. I misjudged you." I smiled softly, letting the words settle. There was no gloating, no public humiliation. The satisfaction came from justice, from seeing her acknowledge her errors, and from the unshakable sense of self-worth I had reclaimed. Everything had shifted. I wasn't just the overlooked daughter anymore. I was a leader, a strategist, and a woman whose boundaries could not be crossed. The story wasn't about revenge, it was about empowerment and earned respect. Weeks later, the estate continued to flourish as a hub for philanthropy, events, and professional gatherings. Invitations flowed from colleagues, friends, and local community leaders. My mother and siblings attended only on my terms, their attitudes transformed. The phone calls that once pressured me were replaced by gratitude and recognition. The tension of exclusion, betrayal, and manipulation had dissolved into acknowledgement of my resilience. I stood on the balcony of my $15 million estate, reflecting on every calculated move, every moment of patience. Victory wasn't in drama or vengeance, it was in creating a world where my family had to respect my choices, and where I had built a legacy on my terms. Finally, I could breathe. I had turned exclusion into empowerment, betrayal into triumph, and my mother's arrogance into a quiet lesson in humility. The story ended with clarity, satisfaction, and a hard-earned sense of justice.